Cardeon scale buccal. What's the rumpus?
Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? Why is it that you're here in Tokyo right now, and what are you doing, and what is your own background?
Well, my name is Baye McNeil, and I'm originally from New York, from Brooklyn, New York, and I've been living here in Japan for about 11 years now. It'll be 11 years in April. I originally came here to get away from the political atmosphere in America at the time, because this was post 9/11, and this was when President Bush at the time was pretty much planning to invade a couple of countries that in search of weapons of mass destruction. And I was like, oh God, this is not pretty.
Yeah, we know how that went. Huh?
So I said, let me get out of here for a while, and I could see what had occurred during 9/11 from my window. So it was, pretty horrible. So I think I was probably suffering from some PTSD at the time. So I came to visit my friend over here and stayed with him for about 10 days, and Japan was amazing. So I decided to, come here and stay for a year and do some teaching, and 1 year turned to 5, turned to 10.
That's the same story for a lot of us.
Yeah. So I think maybe it was around 2008 I started doing some writing here. I was a writer before I came to Japan, but nothing really serious. I did some writing for a local paper in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and I had written a book before I came here, but I hadn't done much writing from 2004 when I arrived in Japan until about 2008. In 2008 I started blogging. I started a blog called Local Yokohama, and the blog pretty much talked about the experiences of a New Yorker, a black person, and a foreigner, all three aspects of life here for me. And it got some notoriety, and a lot of people started paying attention to it, and as a result of that, my first book in Japan grew out of that. It was called Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm a Racist. And it did very well. People understood where I was coming from and read the book and loved the book. And then I came out with a second book, which took on the name of my blog, the second book is called Loco in Yokohama. And it primarily focuses on building relationships here and, maintaining your sanity living under certain conditions here, and also about teaching here and some of the adventures and misadventures that occurred during that time. And as a result of those two books and the success of them, I was offered a job here writing for the newspaper and
The Japan Times.
The Japan Times.
Yes.
Yes, I started my column with them, and also I've done some work for some other periodicals here, Metropolis and a couple others. So yeah, so far so good. The writing career has taken off. I'm working on a third book now, and a fourth. So those should be coming out this year, matter of fact, the third and the fourth. And I'm translating the first book into Japanese, and that should also be coming out this year. So I think what motivated me to get involved with the column, which is called The Black Eye, it comes out the first Monday of every month.
And how would you define the theme exactly of what The Black Eye is about?
The Black Eye focuses on the experiences of black people living here in Japan. I think that we definitely, in the literature here and in the periodicals, we're underrepresented. So I felt like there needed to be a column dedicated to that purpose. It's similar to what's happening in the States. I think that in the media and in the newspapers and magazines, that we are definitely underrepresented. So I've been trying to increase that representation, and so far so good. I've been focusing on what people are doing here. I think that a lot of the problems that occur here with the Japanese people is that they don't have much information about African Americans to draw from. So I want to put more information out there so they can know why we are here, what we are doing here. We're not, nefarious. I think a lot of the ideas that Japanese have about people of color here is that we are here for nefarious reasons, and it's just not the case. I've done stories about musicians and artists and, educators and, all kinds of people that are doing lots of different things here. So that was my motivation, and that's what keeps me going doing that column.
So I guess my next question is, we're talking about Black history, and maybe that's self-explanatory, or maybe it's not. When we're talking about Black history, are we talking about the history of blacks in the United States, or in all of the Americas, or are we talking about Africa? What are we talking about when we use this term Black History Month and Black history?
Well, when we talk about Black History Month, I think primarily you're talking about 3 different countries. So America United States has a Black History Month, that's February. Canada has a Black History Month, that's February. And England has a Black History Month, and that's in October. And the Canadian Black History Month and the British Black History Month were both inspired by the American Black History Month. The founder of the Canadian version of it, her name is Jean Augustine, and she was a member of the House of Commons in Canada. And in the 1980s, I believe, she was an immigrant from Grenada, and she rose in ranks and political ranks to, to become, I guess that their equivalent of senator or congressperson. So the House of Commons in Canada, and from there she was able to push to get Black History Month in Canada instituted. Amazing woman. And in UK there was an African gentleman, so he's not, he was from Ghana, and he was the one who was primarily responsible for getting Black History Month instituted in the United Kingdom. So.
And are they talking mainly about the black people who are inside of their country, or are they trying to cover even, for example, people living in other countries?
What? Those 3 people?
Well, when we talk about the Black History Month, are we focusing on, okay, well, in our classroom or in our society we have people from these countries who live here, or who are Americans or Canadians or British citizens?
Right.
Or are we talking, globally about Black history here?
Well, I don't know how it's practiced in London and in Canada, but in America, it's been primarily African American history. Mm-hmm. I think it should be expanded. I think it should be a global thing, which brings us to what I believe the definition of Black history should be. Black history should be inclusive, not just of the diaspora, but of the entire African experience, from the continent and the diaspora. I grew up, when I was growing up, I had a separate experience. I didn't go to public school. I went to a private school. My mother was part of the Pan-African movement back in the 70s, mm-hmm. and she didn't want her children to be Europeanized, so she put us inside of a school that was that taught us about African culture and African language. We didn't study French or Spanish. We studied Swahili. So my first foreign language is Swahili. This is in Brooklyn, New York, too. And my uniform was a dashiki with the kufi. Yeah, it was real. Combat boots. This was real. This was hardcore, full on. And so I was never really Europeanized. So for me, it's always been about Africa and the diaspora. But I think for many African Americans, they don't really feel a connection to the continent, right, as strong a connection as they ought to. Whereas I don't think that's the case so much in Canada and in UK, because I think that most of the people of color living probably in the UK are immigrants from Africa, yeah, or from the Caribbean, not from the Americas. So their identification is not with slavery, but it's just with the lack of information about people of African descent, period. In those countries. So, of course, in Canada, there is a history of slavery, because most of the people who arrived in Canada came through America via the Underground Railroad. Sure. But also, there are a lot of immigrants from the islands. Not that the islands were free of slavery, but they also had slavery. But, their experience with slavery is different than that of, mainland Americans. Right. So, anyway, I think that the Africans in the UK, their their impetus for getting Black History Month started had nothing to do with this slavery. It was all about increasing the information that British people had about Africans, and I think it would be spread out among all the different countries, not just the countries that are primarily living in England. I think there's mostly Nigerians in Ghana and maybe Senegalese in England, but I think
it sounds like the 19th century colonial history maybe made British a little bit more global in their view, right, as opposed to Americans.
I believe so. But again, I can't really speak much to what's happening in England. I just did the research to find out how they started their Black History Month, but as far as how it's being played out, I don't know much about it. I would love to find out though, so I'm probably going to look into that now.
All right, well, if any of you can give him a plane ticket to
Yes,
Britain,
please, give me a plane ticket. I'd love to go to England in October and check out their Black History Month.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Now, finally, we're here in Japan. So, for a country like the Japanese, for people like the Japanese, what do you think that they should be doing with Black history? Where does it fit in here?
Well, I don't think there'll likely ever be well, I don't want to be negative, but I think it's unlikely that Black history will become mandatory to be taught. It'll be a requirement of Japanese students, just like unlikely it'll be a requirement of American students to learn about Japanese history, or other countries for it to be a requirement to learn about another country's history. However, there are a growing number of people of African descent, people of color living here in Japan. And what we do here in Japan is potentially historical in the Japanese, in Japan. So I think that, for example, a friend of mine, Jesse Freeman, he is a licensed teacher of Ikebana, perhaps the first person of color to achieve that status. So that's history, here in Japan, significant to the Japanese people living here. Also, another friend of mine, Lance Lee, he became the first president of the Tokyo American Club, first Black president, the only Black president of the Tokyo American Club. So that's just significant. These are things that are being achieved here in Japan. And
what would you like Japanese young people to know about Black history if you had a chance to get at them?
That is very diverse. That the things that you would be surprised to learn, all the various creations that have had that Black people have contributed to the world. And I think you should take some time, surf the internet and take your own. You don't have to wait for your teachers to teach it to you. You have the internet as a heck of a resource. A lot of this information is in Japanese as well. So even if you're limited by language, you can still check it out in Nihongo, and look into what other countries, the people who are living here with you, what their countries have contributed to the world history. I mean, a lot of the history that they're exposed to on a regular basis is very limited. It's limited to Japanese and perhaps other Asian countries and a lot of European countries, but Africans and African Americans and Afro-Canadians and Afro-Europeans have contributed a lot to the world. So I would recommend you look into those as well.
And actually, maybe I have a last question.
Yes.
If you could recommend to everybody out there one book to read that would give them the best insight into these issues, maybe one that impacted you, what book would you tell them to read?
I had two books. One book would be Randall Robinson's The Debt. This book really changed my thinking on a lot of things, particularly African American history and how important it is. I mean, because his book was about why there needs to be reparations made for slavery, and the book was remarkable. The second book is a book by one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin, and it's called The Fire Next Time. And it's just a remarkable book. It's actually two essays in the book. One is a letter to his nephew, and one is an essay he wrote about meeting Elijah Muhammad. And after you read those two essays, you will be like, oh, okay. I don't know. I think they're very. Both essays are very informative about a part of history that many people are not really familiar with, and I think that familiarizing yourself with that aspect of our experience, and not by our I meant the African American experience, would be something that would benefit you a great deal.
All right.
Benefit everybody a great deal.
Well, I do think that we probably have a little more reading to do after this segment.
You'll love it. You'll thank me.
But before we get into the reading, how do you feel about having some dinner?
Oh man, I've been looking forward to that part.
All right. Well, as you all know, we film each week here from the Pink Cow restaurant, and after we have a discussion like this, the next step is to go and order some food. So I'm getting a little hungry. I think maybe you are too. So let's wrap it up for What's the Rumpus this week. Please join us next week as well. We are trying to have a series of stimulating guests, and I think we succeeded this week. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.
All right.
See y'all later.
One more